I need to explain everything. Please, just hear me out.
I don't know if I can do this right now.
My wife died years ago. Every month I sent her mom $300 until I found out. For 5 years, Jerome Williams never forgot his duty. Despite financial struggles, he faithfully sent $300 to his mother-in-law Diane every month. A final promise to Keisha before she passed from cancer. But when Jerome began questioning strange transactions in the account, he uncovered a horrifying truth. Everything he believed about his wife's death and his obligation to her mother wasn't what it seemed. The monthly payments weren't supporting a grieving elderly woman. They were feeding a dark secret that had stolen years of his life and thousands of his hard-earned dollars. Now Jerome faced a decision that could change everything. Before we dive into this shocking story, subscribe to the channel so you're always first to know. Hit like if you're ready for the next revelation and comment where you're watching from. New York City, Los Angeles, or maybe Chicago. Alright, let's continue with Jerome as he discovers the truth about his monthly payments. Jerome Williams stood at his kitchen counter, staring at the bank transfer confirmation on his phone screen. $300. Same amount, same day, same recipient account number he'd memorized by heart. The 5th anniversary of this routine had passed 2 months ago. Yet, his fingers still hesitated over the send button every month. Not because he questioned the obligation Keisha had made him promise, and a promise to a dying wife was sacred, but because each payment felt like reopening a wound that never quite healed. The notification sound pulled him back to the present. Another bill reminder. Electric company, this time threatening disconnection if he didn't pay the $167 by Friday. Jerome scrolled through his banking app, watching his checking account balance hover dangerously close to zero. After rent, groceries, his daughter Zara's school supplies, and Dan's monthly support, there wasn't much left for emergencies. His electrician salary was decent, but raising an 8-year-old alone in Chicago meant every dollar had a purpose. Every dollar except those $300 that disappeared into Diane Jefferson's account like clockwork. Daddy, can we get pizza tonight? Zara bounced into the kitchen, backpack still strapped to her small shoulders. Her smile was pure Keisha, bright, infectious, capable of making him forget his troubles for a moment. But tonight, even his daughter's joy couldn't shake the weight pressing down on his chest. Jerome crouched to her level, smoothing a hand over her braided hair. How about we make grilled cheese instead? I picked up that fancy bread you like. Her face fell slightly, but she nodded with the resilience only children possessed. She'd learned not to ask for things they couldn't afford, and that broke his heart more than any bill ever could. The phone buzzed in his palm, a text from Diane Jefferson. Need to discuss payment method? Call me tonight, Jerome frowned. In 5 years, she'd never wanted to discuss anything. She accepted the money with cold efficiency, never asking about Zara or acknowledging the sacrifice these payments represented. The rare times they'd spoken, her voice carried the same bitter edge it had held since Keisha's diagnosis. As if Jerome were somehow responsible for her daughter's death. As if his grief didn't matter because he'd gotten to keep living while Keisha hadn't. He pocketed the phone and helped Zara with her homework, but his mind kept circling back to that text. Something felt different, wrong, maybe. Diane had always insisted on the direct deposit. Claimed it was easier for her fixed income budget. She'd given him the account information. And scrolled on a piece of paper at Keisha's funeral, her hands shaking with what he'd assumed was grief. Now he wondered if it had been something else entirely. The signature on that paper hadn't even been Diane's handwriting. Jerome realized with uncomfortable clarity that he'd never questioned it, never verified, never asked to see her bank statements, or wondered why a woman living on Social Security needed exactly $300 every month. No more, no less. As Zara settled into bed that night, Jerome found himself standing in his closet, staring at the small box of Keisha's belongings Diane had given him after the funeral. He'd barely touched it since then, too raw to handle physical reminders of what he'd lost. But tonight, something compelled him to lift the lid. Her wedding ring, a few photos they'd missed packing her medical bracelet from the hospital, and at the bottom a business card from the funeral home with Diane's signature on the back. A note about picking up the cremation certificate. The handwriting looked nothing like the account information she'd given him, nothing at all. Jerome set the box down carefully, his electrician's hand steady despite the tremor in his chest. For 5 years, he'd honored what he believed was Keisha's final wish. For 5 years, he'd sent money to support the woman who had raised the love of his life. But looking at those two completely different handwriting samples, a cold realization crept through his bones. What if everything he believed about duty and obligation and keeping promises was built on something that wasn't true? What if Diane Jefferson had been lying to him from the very beginning? The bank transfer confirmation glowed on his nightstand, and for the first time since Kesha's death, Jerome Williams wondered if he'd been sending money to the wrong place entirely. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Troy Henderson knocked on Jerome's door at 7:30, 2 cups of coffee in his hands and concern etched across his weathered face. Troy had been Jerome's closest friend since high school, now working customer service at First National Bank. His presence this early meant business. Jerome accepted the coffee gratefully, noting how Troy's usual easy smile was nowhere to be found. They settled on the front porch, watching Zara climb into the school bus before Troy finally spoke. "I need to tell you something about that account you've been sending money to." Troy's voice carried the weight of someone who'd wrestled with a decision all night. "I'd pulled up the transaction history after you mentioned Diane Jefferson. That account has been active way beyond what you'd expect from an elderly woman on a fixed income. Large deposits, frequent transfers, activity patterns that don't match someone just paying bills." Troy handed him a folded paper. "These are the transaction dates." "I couldn't get details, privacy laws, but the pattern's all wrong." Jerome unfolded the paper, his electrician's eye for detail immediately catching the inconsistencies. Deposits of $800, $1,200, sometimes $2,000 appeared weekly. His $300 looked insignificant by comparison, but what made his stomach clench was the timing. Every deposit from him was transferred out within 24 hours to an account he didn't recognize. This wasn't money being used for living expenses. This was money being moved, laundered through Diane's account, like water through a pipe. There's more. "The address on file doesn't match what you gave me for Diane Jefferson. The account holder's address is Riverside Apartments on Oak Street, apartment 214. Troy's voice dropped lower. "It's not a senior living facility. It's one of those short-term rental places, the kind people use when they don't want to be found. And the account activity spikes right around your monthly payment, like someone's expecting it and knows exactly what to do with it the minute it arrives." Jerome felt something cold settle in his chest. 5 years of faithful payments, and he'd never verified where the money actually went. Never visited Diane at her new address. Never questioned why a woman who barely tolerated him during Kesha's illness suddenly needed exactly $300 every month. When Kesha was alive, Diane had been financially independent, proud to the point of stubbornness about accepting help. The woman who'd refused to let them pay for groceries was now depending on his support. It had never made sense, but grief had a way of making senseless things seem reasonable. "I tried calling the number you gave me for her," Jerome admitted, pulling out his phone. "Go straight to voicemail every time. Generic message, no name." Troy examined the phone number, then pulled out his own device. After searching, he looked up with grim news. This number's registered to a different name entirely, not Diane Jefferson. And according to public records, there's no Diane Jefferson at that Oak Street address. The apartment's been rented by someone else for the past 3 years. The words hung between them like smoke, filling the morning air with implications neither wanted to acknowledge. Jerome's coffee had gone cold, but he barely noticed. Every instinct he developed in 20 years of electrical work, the ability to spot faulty wiring, dangerous connections, systems that looked right but functioned wrong, was screaming that nothing about the situation was what it appeared to be. Troy stood up slowly, mixing friendship with professional concern. "Jerome, I think someone's been playing a long con on you. If I'm right about these transaction patterns, this isn't just about $300 a month." He handed Jerome a business card for a private investigator, Marcus Reed. He specializes in financial fraud cases. "Whatever's happening here, you need someone who knows how to trace money legally." Troy paused at the porch steps, his expression serious. "One more thing. That account's been receiving payments from at least 4 other sources. Monthly payments just like yours, all in different amounts. You might not be the only person getting scammed." As Troy's car disappeared down the street, Jerome sat alone with the transaction records spread across his lap. The numbers told a story he wasn't ready to hear but couldn't ignore. Somewhere in Chicago, someone was collecting money from multiple sources, using Diane Jefferson's name and his grief as tools in elaborate theft. The woman who'd raised Kesha, who'd held his hand at the funeral, who'd accepted his promise to take care of her. That woman might not exist at all. The morning sun felt cold against his skin as Jerome Williams realized he'd been feeding money to a ghost for 5 long years. Jerome spent the weekend wrestling with Troy's revelations, but Monday morning found him parked across from Riverside Apartments with newfound purpose. 5 years of struggling to honor what might be a false promise had changed something fundamental in his core. He wasn't here to confront anyone. He was here to see with his own eyes what $300 a month had been supporting. The apartment complex squatted between a laundromat and a check-cashing place. Nothing suggesting senior living or somewhere Diane Jefferson would spend her golden years. Jerome approached the building manager with steady confidence his work had taught him. The manager, a tired man named Pete, barely glanced up when Jerome explained he was trying to locate his mother-in-law. Apartment 214 that's been rented by the same person for 3 years now. Quiet tenant, pays on time, keeps to herself. Pete pulled out a rental ledger, but it ain't no Diane Jefferson. Name on the lease is Kesha Williams. The words hit Jerome like voltage through faulty wiring. His hand gripped the counter as Pete continued, oblivious to the shock he delivered. Nice lady, maybe mid-30s. Keeps weird hours sometimes, but never causes trouble. Jerome forced his voice steady. Could I see the security footage from the lobby? Just to confirm if this is the person I'm looking for. Pete shrugged. Can't let you take Obies, but if it helps you find your family. He led Jerome to a cramped office where a grainy monitor displayed the lobby entrance. Pete scrolled backward through timestamps showing residents coming and going. Then Jerome saw her. The woman walking through the lobby moved with familiar grace that made his breath catch. Her hair was shorter, darker, but the way she tilted her head, checking her phone, was unmistakable. A gesture he'd watched 1,000 times across breakfast tables. The woman paused at mailboxes, and when she turned toward the camera, Jerome's world shifted. The face was older, thinner, but those eyes belonged to his wife. That's her, Pete said casually. Kesha Williams lives alone, far as I know. Gets visitors sometimes. Jerome stared at the timestamp 3 days ago. 3 days after he'd sent another payment to support a dead woman's mother. The woman who Dee made him promise to care for Diane Jefferson was apparently alive and using her own name to collect payments meant for someone else. Pete scrolled through more footage showing Kesha entering and leaving over the past month. She looked healthy, vibrant, nothing like the cancer patient who'd wasted away in their bedroom. In one clip, she carried expensive grocery bags. In another, dressed for what looked like a date, laughing on her phone. This wasn't someone hiding from illness. This was someone living a completely different life. While Jerome struggled to honor promises made to a person who'd never died, the security footage revealed other details that made Jerome's chest tighten. A man appeared in several clips with Kesha, his hand possessive on her back. Jerome didn't recognize him, but their intimacy was obvious. They moved like an established couple, comfortable in ways that spoke of long familiarity. In recent footage, Kesha's profile showed something that made Jerome's hand shake. The unmistakable curve of early pregnancy. She was building a new family while he sent monthly payments to support the fiction of her death. Jerome thanked Pete and walked to his truck on unsteady legs. The drive home passed in a blur of traffic and racing thoughts. Kesha was alive. His wife, mother of his child, the woman he'd grieved for 5 years, was living 20 minutes away under her own name. She was healthy, happy, pregnant with another man's child, and collecting his money through elaborate deception involving her mother. The weight pressed down like a collapsed beam, crushing and inescapable. That evening, after Zara was asleep, Jerome sat with Marcus Reed's business card. The private investigator answered on the second ring. I need to hire you, Jerome said without preamble. My wife faked her death 5 years ago, and I've been sending money to support her lie ever since. Marcus listened as Jerome explained the footage. The lease, the monthly payments that kept him struggling while Kesha built a new life. This is more common than you'd think, Marcus finally said. Life insurance fraud, staged deaths, disappearing acts. The hard part's getting evidence that holds up in court. If what you're telling me is true, we're looking at multiple felonies. Wire fraud, insurance fraud, identity theft at minimum. His tone grew serious. The question is, do you want to expose this for closure, or are you looking to press charges? Jerome stared out his kitchen window at the neighborhood where he'd raised Zara alone, where he'd struggled with the bills while honoring a dead woman's wishes. The answer came easier than expected. He wanted the truth, whatever the wad, and he wanted the people who'd stolen 5 years of his life to face consequences. The woman on that security footage wasn't the wife he'd mourned. She was a stranger who'd weaponized his love and grief for profit. That stranger was about to discover that Jerome Williams was done being anyone's fool. Marcus Reed arrived Wednesday evening with a manila folder thick enough to stop a bullet. The private investigator spread documents across Jerome's kitchen table with methodical precision, each piece representing another crack in the foundation of what Jerome had believed for 5 years. The first document hit hardest. A hospital discharge summary dated 3 days before Kesha's supposed death, signed by a doctor Jerome had never heard of. Your wife was discharged from Mercy General on March 15, 2019. Alive, stable condition, released to family care. Marcus pointed to the signature line. The interesting part is who signed for her release. Diane Jefferson. Listed as legal guardian due to patient's emotional distress and inability to make medical decisions. He pulled out another document. But here's the death certificate filed the same day at a different hospital across town. Signed by a doctor who had his license suspended 2 months later for falsifying records. Jerome stared at the papers, his mind trying to process the systematic nature of the deception. This wasn't desperate fear. This was planning, coordination, multiple people working together to erase Kesha Williams from existence while keeping her alive to profit from his grief. The hospital discharge showed her real signature, shaky but legible. The death certificate bore something that looked nothing like her handwriting. Someone had practiced forging her name, or Diane had signed for her daughter one final time. The cremation records get more interesting, Marcus continued, sliding another folder across the table. Riverside Funeral Home has no record of cremating Kesha Williams on the date listed in your paperwork. But they did cremate an unidentified woman the same day, a Jane Doe from the county morgue paid for in cash by an anonymous donor. He paused to let that sink in. The urn you were given contains the ashes of a complete stranger. Your wife's mother handed you some random woman's remains and called it closure. The room felt smaller, suddenly walls closing in on Jerome's ability to breathe. He walked to the box of Kesha's belongings, the one Diane had given him after the funeral, and dumped its contents onto the table. Her wedding ring, too small for the fingers he remembered. Medical bracelet from a hospital stay he'd never heard about. Photos of them together that looked wrong somehow, like someone had replaced genuine memories with carefully staged replicas. Every piece of physical evidence he treasured as connection to his dead wife was revealing itself as part of an elaborate production. Marcus examined each item with professional detachment. The wedding ring is a fake gold-plated, worth maybe $20. The real one probably got pawned years ago. He held up the medical bracelet. This is from a hospital in Florida, not Chicago. According to my research, your wife has been using variations of her real name in different states, probably testing new identities. The photos were next. These were printed on photo paper that wasn't manufactured until 2021, 2 years after she supposedly died. Jerome sank into his chair, the weight of systematic betrayal crushing down like a building collapse. Every memory he cherished, every moment of grief he'd worked through, every promise he'd kept to honor her legacy. All of it manipulated by someone who'd known exactly how to exploit his love. The woman he'd married, lived with for 10 years, created a child with, had studied him well enough to orchestrate his emotional responses from beyond what he believed was the grave. There's more. Marcus pulled out the final document, a life insurance payout statement. $50,000 paid to Diane Jefferson as beneficiary 4 months after the supposed death. Kesha changed the beneficiary from you to her mother 3 days before the staged death, citing marital difficulties in the paperwork. Jerome had never heard about marital difficulties. Their marriage had been solid, their future planned, their love genuine, at least on his part. Apparently, Kesha had been planning her escape while he'd been planning their anniversary celebration. The life insurance revelation explained everything and nothing. $50,000 was enough to start over, relocate, fund a new identity while maintaining the old one for monthly income. But it didn't explain why someone who declaimed to love him would choose psychological torture over honest conversation. It didn't explain why Diane would collaborate in destroying the man who tried to care for her daughter's child. Money was the obvious motive, but the cruelty felt personal, targeted, designed to inflict maximum emotional damage over the longest possible time. Marcus closed the folder with the finality of a coffin lid. Tomorrow, I'm recommending we contact the FBI's white-collar crime division. This crosses state lines, involves federal wire fraud, and represents ongoing criminal enterprise. His voice carried the weight of experience with similar cases. But I need to ask you something. Are you prepared for what comes next? Once we expose this, there's no going back to the comfortable lie. Your daughter's going to learn her mother's alive and chose to abandon her. Your community is going to know you've been supporting a fraud. And Keisha is going to face federal charges that could put her away for decades. Jerome looked around his kitchen, at the home he'd maintained alone. At the photographs of Zara he'd hung to fill the emptiness left by fake grief. For 5 years he'd lived in a carefully constructed prison of obligation and loss, sending money to support a lie while struggling to raise his daughter with dignity. The woman who created this prison was 20 minutes away, pregnant with another man's child, building a life funded by his sacrifice. The choice Marcus was offering wasn't really a choice at all. It was a chance to reclaim reality, whatever the cost. "Schedule the meeting," Jerome said, his voice steady for the first time in years. "I want them to know that Jerome Williams isn't anybody's fool anymore." The decision felt like switching on power after working in darkness, illuminating corners of his life that had been shadowed by manufactured grief. Tomorrow would bring federal agents, criminal charges, and the systematic dismantling of elaborate fraud. Tonight, Jerome Williams was finally ready to stop mourning a woman who'd never bothered to die. Jerome made the call Thursday morning, his finger hovering over the send button for the monthly transfer like a man defusing a bomb. $300 remained in his account for the first time in 60 consecutive months. Instead of the familiar confirmation message, his phone displayed, "Transfer canceled by user." The words felt like the first honest thing he'd done in 5 years. Now came the waiting. And Jerome had learned patience from 20 years of electrical work where rushing meant getting burned. The response came at 11:30 with a call from Diane's number. The first time she'd initiated contact in months. Jerome let it ring 4 times, giving Marcus Reed's recording equipment time to capture every word. "Hello, Diane." His voice carried none of the difference that had marked their previous conversations. The woman on the other end sounded different, too. Sharper, more urgent, stripped of the grieving mother act she'd maintained for years. "Jerome, there's been some mistake with the bank transfer. I've been checking my account all morning, and the money didn't come through." Diane's words tumbled over each other with barely controlled panic. "I need you to call the bank and fix whatever went wrong. You know, I depend on that money for medications, rent, everything." The desperation was real, but Jerome recognized it now as the panic of someone whose carefully constructed scheme was collapsing. "I'm having cash flow problems this month," Jerome replied, following the script he and Marcus had rehearsed. "My daughter needed emergency dental work, and the electric bill was higher than expected. I'll try to send something next week, maybe half the usual amount." The silence stretched long enough for Jerome to hear traffic in the background. Street noise that didn't match the quiet residential area where Diane supposedly lived. "You can't just stop sending money without warning. Keisha made you promise to take care of me, and that means every month the full amount." Her voice had transformed from weak, elderly woman to something harder, more calculating. "If you're having money problems, get a second job. Take out a loan. I don't care what you have to do, but that money needs to be in my account by tomorrow, or there's going to be consequences." "What kind of consequences?" Jerome asked, genuinely curious how far she had taken the charade. Diane's breathing grew heavier, and he could hear her scrambling to regain control of a conversation that had spiraled beyond her management. When she spoke again, her voice carried the desperation that made people say things they'd later regret. "Kesha told me things about you before she died. Things about how you treated her, how you made her feel trapped in that marriage." Diane's voice dropped to a malicious whisper. "If you don't keep sending that money, I might have to share those stories with people, with your work, with Zara's school, with anyone who thinks Jerome Williams is such a good man." The blackmail attempt was pathetic and transparent, but it revealed something important. Diane was running out of options. Jerome almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "That's interesting, Diane, because I've been wondering about something myself." He let the pause stretch, savoring the moment when Hunter became hunted. "I drove by your old address last week, the one I've been sending money to. Funny thing, the people living there say no Diane Jefferson has ever received mail at that location. They've been forwarding packages to a different address for 3 years. Want to explain that?" The phone went dead. Complete silence. Jerome looked at his screen to confirm the call had ended, then immediately dialed Marcus Reed. She hung up as soon as I mentioned the address discrepancy, but not before threatening blackmail and demanding I take out loans to keep sending money. "You get all that?" Marcus confirmed the recording was clean, then delivered news that made Jerome's pulse quicken with anticipation. "FBI is interested. Very interested. Agent Sarah Chun from White Collar Crime wants to meet tomorrow morning." Marcus' voice carried professional satisfaction. Between the insurance fraud, fake death certificate, wire fraud, and now attempted extortion, they're looking at a potential RICO case. This isn't just about you anymore, Jerome. They think your wife and her mother are part of a larger operation targeting grieving spouses. The scope was expanding beyond Jerome's personal betrayal into something threatening other families. Other widowers struggling to honor promises made to people who would weaponize their love. That afternoon, Jerome picked up Zara from school and took her for ice cream, something they couldn't afford, but he suddenly felt compelled to do. She chattered about her day, her friends, her upcoming art project, blissfully unaware that her world was about to change in ways he couldn't yet explain. Looking at her face, so much like Kesha's but innocent of the calculation that had marked her mother's final years, Jerome felt the weight of his choice. Zara would learn the truth eventually, but for now she could finish her strawberry cone in peace. His phone buzzed with another call from Diane's number, but Jerome let it go to voicemail. Then another call. Then a text. "We need to talk. Meet me tomorrow at noon. Lincoln Park by the lake. Come alone." The desperation was palpable, but so was something else. A tone suggesting Diane was ready to play cards she'd been holding in reserve. Jerome forwarded the message to Marcus, then typed his response. "I'll be there." Tomorrow would bring federal agents, recorded conversations, and the beginning of the end for a fraud that had stolen 5 years of his life. But tonight, Jerome Williams sat in his kitchen with his daughter, feeling genuinely hopeful about the future for the first time since he believed his wife had died. The trap was set, and he was no longer the prey. Lincoln Park stretched along Lake Michigan like a green ribbon, its walking paths dotted with joggers enjoying the crisp Friday afternoon. Jerome arrived early, positioning himself on a bench with clear sight lines while Marcus Reed's surveillance team blended into the urban landscape. The wire taped to his chest felt no heavier than electrical equipment he carried daily. But the weight of what was about to unfold pressed against his ribs like a held breath. 5 years of lies were about to collapse, and Jerome intended to control the demolition. Diane Jefferson appeared at exactly noon, walking with the brisk pace of someone 20 years younger than her supposed age. Gone was the frail elderly woman from Kasha's funeral, replaced by someone who moved with purpose and calculation. She'd de-traded conservative dress for dark jeans and leather, jacket that suggested resources beyond what Social Security should provide. Her eyes were sharp, alert, scanning the area with weariness of someone who knew she was walking into dangerous territory. "You look good, Diane," Jerome said as she approached. Younger somehow. Must be all that Florida sunshine Marcus told me about. He watched her expression shift from forced friendliness to something harder when she realized he'd been investigating. She sat with careful distance, purse clutched tight like it contained something valuable, ready to run if necessary. "I don't know what you think you've discovered, Jerome, but you're playing with things you don't understand." Diane's voice carried none of the weakness he'd grown accustomed to. This was someone used to control who'd orchestrated complex fraud through sheer will and manipulation. "That money you've been sending, it's not just about me. There are other people involved. People who do and appreciate having their business disrupted by some electrician who thinks he's smarter than he actually is." Jerome felt a chill unrelated to the lake breeze. The implication was clear. This wasn't just about Diane and Kesha anymore. This was about a network that preyed on grief and turned love into profit. The recording device suddenly felt like the most important equipment he'd ever carried, capturing evidence that could protect not just him, but other victims he'd never met. "Tell me about the other people, Diane. Tell me how this really works." Jerome kept his voice steady, professional, like diagnosing a faulty circuit. Diane's laugh was bitter, carrying the weight of someone who'd been running cons long enough to recognize when the game was changing. She opened her purse and pulled out a cigarette. "You want the truth? Fine. Your precious Kesha came to me 3 months before she supposedly died, crying about feeling trapped, wanting out, but not wanting to hurt you or lose Zara." Diane lit the cigarette with practiced ease. "I told her about a friend who'd helped other women disappear from situations they couldn't handle. Clean breaks, new identities, no messy divorces or custody battles, just gone like they never existed. At first, it was supposed to be simple. Fake the death, collect insurance, disappear forever. But then Kesha got greedy. Said if she was going to be dead anyway, why not stay dead and collect from multiple sources?" Diane's voice mixed admiration and disgust. "She'd studied you for 10 years, Jerome. She knew exactly how to push your buttons, make you feel guilty enough to support her mother forever. The monthly payments were her idea, not mine. She said you'd never stop sending money as long as you believed it was what she would have wanted. Jerome's hands clenched into fists, but his voice remained level. And the other victims? How many families are you destroying with this scheme? Diane took another drag, eyes fixed on the lake, as if she could see escape routes in the waves. When she spoke again, her tone carried casual indifference of someone discussing weather, rather than systematic destruction of human lives. Enough to make it profitable. Grieving spouses are easy marks. They're desperate to honor promises, prove their love meant something. We've got 3 operations running in different cities, maybe 15 active income streams at any given time. She flicked ash between them. Your wife's in Florida now, pregnant with some real estate developer's baby. She sends me 20% of whatever she collects from you and 2 other men who think they re-supporting their dead wives' relatives. It's a beautiful system. Really clean, sustainable, virtually impossible to trace. The confession hung in the air like smoke from an electrical fire. Toxic, but providing clarity, Jerome needed to understand the full scope. This wasn't just personal betrayal. It was organized crime, systematic exploitation of human grief with tentacles reaching into multiple states and dozens of lives. The woman beside him wasn't just his former mother-in-law. She was a criminal who turned his love for Keisha into a business model. There's just one problem with your beautiful system, Diane. Jerome stood slowly, his electrician's instincts recognizing when power needed to be cut off to prevent further damage. It's built on a foundation that can't support the weight of what you were trying to carry. He gestured subtly towards surveillance team positioned throughout the park. And sometimes when you overload a circuit, the whole thing burns down. Diane's eyes widened as she spotted federal agents emerging from concealed positions, badges glinting in afternoon sun like warning lights on a control panel. She dropped her cigarette and reached for her purse, but Jerome's hand closed over her wrist, with firm grip of someone who spent years working with the live electrical current. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, he said quietly. You've done enough damage for one lifetime. As Agent Sarah Chun approached with handcuffs ready, Jerome Williams felt something he hadn't experienced in 5 years. The solid satisfaction of a job completed correctly with all dangerous connections finally severed. The federal courthouse in downtown Chicago buzzed with the kind of controlled chaos that marked high-profile white-collar cases. Jerome sat in the witness waiting room, his best suit pressed and his testimony rehearsed, watching through bulletproof glass as news vans lined the street like predators waiting for blood. 3 months had passed since Diane's arrest in Lincoln Park. 3 months of FBI investigations that had unraveled. A fraud network spanning 4 states and devastating dozens of families. Today was the day the system would finally acknowledge what Jerome had known since that first security camera footage. Keisha Williams was alive, and she was going to pay for the lie that had stolen 5 years of his life. Agent Sarah Chen entered the waiting room with the kind of professional satisfaction that came from building an airtight case. The FBI's investigation had been thorough and devastating, tracing financial records, fake death certificates, and insurance payouts across multiple jurisdictions. Chun carried a thick folder that represented the systematic destruction of everything Diane Jefferson and her network had built. We've got them cold, Mr. Williams. The evidence is overwhelming. And Diane's cooperation has given us everything we need to prosecute the entire operation. The cooperation hadn't come easily. Diane had spent 2 weeks in federal custody before agreeing to testify against her co-conspirators, in exchange for a reduced sentence. The network, she'd revealed, was larger and more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. 17 active cases across Illinois, Florida, Texas, and California, with victims sending monthly payments to support relatives who were either dead for real or had never existed at all. Jerome's case had become the keystone that brought down an entire criminal enterprise built on weaponized grief. Your wife was arrested yesterday at her apartment in Miami, Chung continued, her voice carrying the weight of justice finally served. Keisha Williams, also known as Keisha Martinez and Keisha Johnson, depending on which identity she was using with which victim. She's been charged with federal wire fraud, conspiracy, insurance fraud, and identity theft. The pregnancy complicated the arrest, but she's in federal custody now awaiting trial. The image of Keisha in handcuffs, pregnant with another man's child while facing decades in federal prison, should have brought Jerome satisfaction. Instead, it just felt like the end of something that should have ended years ago. The courtroom was packed when Jerome took the witness stand. every seat filled with victims, family members, reporters, and law enforcement officials who'd worked the case. Judge Patricia Morales presided with the kind of stern authority that made everyone sit straighter. Her experience with financial crimes evident in how efficiently she managed the proceedings. Jerome's testimony was clinical, factual, stripped of the emotional weight that had carried him through 5 years of unknowing victimization. He recounted the monthly payments, the suspicious transactions, the security footage that had revealed his wife's continued existence. Across the courtroom, Diane Jefferson sat at the defense table looking older than her 67 years. The confident woman from Lincoln Park, replaced by someone who understood the weight of federal charges. She wore the orange jumpsuit of someone denied bail, her lawyer whispering urgently in her ear as Jerome described the systematic way she'd exploited his grief. When their eyes met, Jerome saw no remorse, no recognition of the damage she'd caused, just the cold calculation of someone who viewed other people's pain as a business opportunity. The prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Torres, walked Jerome through the evidence with practiced precision. Bank records showing $18,000 in payments over 5 years. Insurance documents revealing the $50,000 payout that had funded Kesha's new life. Hospital records proving she'd been discharged alive the same day she'd supposedly died. Phone records connecting Diane to a network of conspirators across 4 states. Each piece of evidence built toward an inescapable conclusion. Jerome Williams had been the victim of an elaborate, ongoing criminal conspiracy. Mr. Williams, Torres asked during direct examination, what impact did this fraud have on your family's financial situation? Jerome looked toward the gallery where Troy Henderson sat with Zara, his 8-year-old daughter who still believed her mother had died of cancer. The truth would come eventually, but for now, she was just proud of her father for helping catch the bad people who had stolen from their family. I struggled to pay basic bills while sending money to support what I believed was my obligation to my deceased wife's mother. Jerome testified. I delayed necessary repairs to our home, postponed my daughter's medical care, and worked overtime constantly to meet the financial commitment I thought I owed. The $18,000 I sent over 5 years represents money that should have gone toward my child's future, toward building stability for our family. Instead, it funded a lie that kept me trapped in grief while the woman I'd mourned built a new life with my money. Defense attorney Rebecca Walsh tried to paint Jerome as a willing participant who never bothered to verify where his money was going. But her cross-examination fell flat against the mountain of evidence Torres had presented. The jury saw through her attempts to shift blame, recognizing Jerome as what he was, a man whose love and sense of duty had been weaponized against him by people who viewed human decency as weakness to be exploited. When sentencing came 2 weeks later, Judge Morales delivered justice with the kind of clarity Jerome had been waiting 5 years to hear. Miss Jefferson, you have participated in one of the most cruel and calculated schemes this court has encountered. You preyed upon people in their most vulnerable moments, turning their love into profit and their grief into a commodity. Diane received 15 years in federal prison, her age ensuring she'd spend most of her remaining life behind bars. Kesha's sentencing would come later after the birth of her child in her own trial in Florida. But the charges she faced, multiple counts of wire fraud, conspiracy, and identity theft across state lines, carried a potential sentence of 30 years. The woman who faked her death to escape her responsibilities would spend the better part of her real life paying for that choice. Jerome felt no satisfaction in her fate, only the relief of knowing she could never again turn someone's love into their financial prison. Outside the courthouse, Jerome stood with Agent Shannon Torres, watching as news crews interviewed other victims whose cases had been solved because of his decision to fight back. Families from Texas, Florida, and California had flown to Chicago to witness the end of a network that had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from people who trusted in the basic human obligation to care for the grieving. Jerome Williams had started this journey trying to honor what he thought was his wife's final wish. He was ending it having helped protect dozens of other families from the same systematic cruelty. 6 months after the trial, Jerome Williams stood in his renovated kitchen, watching Zara arrange fresh flowers in the vase they'd bought at the farmer's market. The $18,000 recovered through federal asset forfeit had transformed their modest home into something that felt like possibility rather than survival. New appliances hummed efficiently. The electrical system he'd rewired no longer sparked dangerously. And Zara's college fund finally had a balance that suggested dreams might be achievable. The weight of manufactured obligation had lifted, replaced by authentic responsibility to the daughter, who looked at him with uncomplicated love. The hardest conversation had come 3 months earlier when Zara asked questions about the bad. People on the news evolved into harder truths about her mother's choices. Jerome had prepared for anger, confusion, emotional devastation, requiring years of therapy. Instead, his 8-year-old had listened with resilience that amazed him, then asked if this meant they could finally get the dog Dee always talked about but never afforded. Children possessed wisdom about moving forward that adults often lost in the complexity of looking backward. Sunday dinner had become tradition with Troy Henderson and his girlfriend Maria, chosen family that mattered more than blood relations. They'd learned that happiness was something you built deliberately rather than something that happened accidentally. Jerome's promotion to electrical supervisor came with 20% salary increase and respect from colleagues who Dee watched him handle catastrophe with quiet dignity. The man who Dee once struggled with monthly bills while supporting a lie now managed budgets with confidence. Of someone who Dee learned the difference between duty and manipulation. It's funny how much easier work becomes when you're not carrying around someone else's deception. Jerome told Troy over pot roast that actually included vegetables this time. Luxuries he no longer had to calculate against fictional obligations. Freedom from manipulation felt like breathing clean air after years in smoke. Everything became clearer, more manageable, genuinely his own. The follow-up story about the fraud network had featured interviews with other victims, whose lives had been rebuilt after prosecution. 12 families recovered significant damages. 3 women discovered their supposedly dead husbands. They were alive under assumed names,